Hiya and welcome everybody to this Hustings that has been organised by End Poverty in Edinburgh. End Poverty in Edinburgh is a group of citizens that was created in 2020 following one of the recommendations included in the Edinburgh Poverty Commission report of 2019. We are citizens of Edinburgh who have experienced poverty or have worked with people on poverty, sometimes both. We want to eradicate poverty from Edinburgh. We raise awareness of poverty, and we are happy to work with anyone who is committed to this goal. This event will last approximately an hour. It will have two parts. During the first part, candidates will address the audience for 3 minutes each. The order has been established randomly. Once candidates have been talking for 2 minutes, I will raise my electronic hand to give a gentle reminder of the time is running out. The candidates during the second part will answer some questions that have been shared with them in advance, and candidates will have up to 2 minutes to answer each question. This event will be recorded, so be careful what you say. It will be there for the future forever. And please mute yourselves if you are not using your turn to speak, so we avoid background noises. The chat box will be open during the event. People are free to post questions and comments, and we would expect everybody to be respectful with each other. We are very grateful to have an amazing panel of candidates today for this 4th July election. We are going to just introduce the panel. We have Tracey Gilbert for the Scottish Labour Party. He's a candidate for Edinburgh North and Leith. We have Dan Heap, Scottish Greens, candidate for Edinburgh, Sighthill and Gorgie. Joe Mowat, Scottish Conservative candidate for Edinburgh North and Leith. Tommy Sheppard, Scottish National Party, is a candidate for Edinburgh East and Musselburgh. And Mike Andersen, Scottish Liberal Democrats, a candidate for Edinburgh North and Leith. So with any further ado, because we are going to be quite constrained by time, I'm going to ask the first candidate in the list, that is Tracey Gilbert, to use their 3 minutes to address us today. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me along today. I didn't get the brief on the 3 minutes, so I hope I'll keep the time on what I'm about to say. So my name's Tracey Gilbert. I am standing, as we know, as a Labour candidate for Edinburgh North and Leith. I'll tell you a bit about my background. I grew up in Pennycoop, but I've lived in Leith all my adult life. My current job is I run a trade union, so I fight every day to represent working people, low-paid workers, and in the sectors that I represent, it is food manufacturing and retail, so it is one of the most diverse groups of workers, covering disabled, young people, BAME workers and LGBT workers. Most people at some stage of their working career will work in retail, and I'm very privileged to be the Regional Secretary of USDAW and the first ever woman to hold that role. So I speak on behalf of over 500,000 workers on a daily basis and represent over 40,000 members. In my day job, I obviously deliver legislation, and I'm really keen to make sure that we deliver good legislation for workers across the UK. And fighting poverty is obviously a central point of what trade unions do. I grew up in a council house in Pennycoop, just 10 miles away from here. I have been a benefactor of lots of Labour policies, including support from the welfare state and free school meals when I was a child. I grew up in a working class family. We were aspirational, like all working class people are, but that was during the 80s strike in the Thatcher years. And the reason I'm standing as a candidate is because I'm so sick of being our community in Edinburgh North and Leith being let down by both a failing SNP government and the Scottish Parliament for 17 years and the Tories in Westminster for the last 14 years. And I think many of us on this call will agree that Edinburgh is certainly a tale of two cities, with some people having access and have an agency to access goods and services and good public services. But for so many people in our community, that is not the case. So on the Labour manifesto, we will deliver 5 things. We'll deliver economic stability, and we'll do that through tough spending rules, but keeping inflation low, but delivering mortgages for people. We'll cut NHS waiting times, to bring it down. We'll invest 160,000 new appointments. We'll set up GB Energy, which will help regulate bills and bring the cost of living crisis down. We'll deliver the New Deal for working people. We'll lift 200,000 families out of poverty. We'll create jobs and opportunities for young people, and we'll maximise Scotland's opportunities. We know that as Scottish people, that Scotland's a great place to live. That's why we live here. We need more Scotland the brand, not Scotland the brave. So thank you so much. I hope I've kept the time, Carmel.
You basically just smashed it. 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your speech. And I'm going to go now to Dan Heap from Scottish Greens. Please.
Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. My name is Dan Heap. I'm the Green candidate for Edinburgh South West, and I'm a local councillor in the Sighthill Gorgie part of the constituency as well. In this election, the Greens have several key messages. We're certainly saying that it is the last election really we have to face up to the realities of climate change so we can all have a future. But we're also saying that as well as very radical action on climate change, we also need radical action on poverty and inequality. We are saying that we think we're the only party that is really has those sufficiently large and radical plans to reduce poverty. In the constituency I'm seeking to represent in Parliament, we have some of the lowest levels of poverty anywhere in the city, and also some of the highest level of poverty anywhere in the city. Often just a couple of minutes apart, a couple of minutes walk around the bus, you can go from an area where there's huge amounts of opportunity, low levels of poverty and inequality, and then you just can walk down the street, sometimes just a couple of minutes, and reach an area that has very, very high levels of poverty. And we're the only party that is really facing up to the scale of that challenge. So some of the things we're talking about, for example, is to remove the a two-child limit, which is plunging young families into poverty. That was in our manifesto released just this morning. We're also looking at getting rid of the benefit cap, which really laser targets children for cuts, and they are losing over £2,000 a year. And we're also looking at trying to reverse some of the cuts in universal credit. Then longer term, we really need to also be looking at something like a universal basic income, which will provide a dignified standard of living for everyone, younger person, working age people, and older people. And clearly, all of those things come at a very considerable cost. But we are also looking at how those can be funded. And I think in the past few years, public debate in this country, and I think that's something Labour unfortunately has brought into, this idea that there's no money left and we can't pay for radical climate action or radical action against poverty. That's not true. There's a huge amount of money, but we just need to be bold enough to go and find that and get that intact. So, for example, we are talking about a wealth tax on the richest 1%, which would kick in at over £3 million, 1%, and then escalate up to 10%. That would gather in about £70 billion, and that's not including additional withdrawals of gas and oil subsidies, which would together release about £80 billion, and that's more than enough to pay for things like the two-child limit. And that's what we're arguing: radical action, and we also know how to pay for it. Thank you.
Again, you have smashed the limit of 3 minutes. Thank you very much, just in time. Thank you so much, Dan. The next candidate to speak would be Joe Mowat, Scottish Conservative, so candidate Edinburgh North and Leith.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today and to take part in these hustings. My name's Joe Mowat. I've lived in Edinburgh for over 30 years, and most of that, except all of that, pretty much until December, in Edinburgh North and Leith. So I know the area well, and I know the challenges of this area well. I've been a councillor in the city centre ward for 17 years, so that covers some of the poorest parts of the city and some of the, like all wards in Edinburgh, actually, some of the poorest parts and some of the richest parts. And it takes me from Dunby Dykes to the Murray Few. So like all councillors, I have an experience of of the deep divisions in the city and the difficulties that for some in bridging those divisions from poverty to wealth. And as an Edinburgh councillor, I took part in the work that the council did, which formed the Poverty Commission and carried out with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation to look in poverty in Edinburgh. And one of the really interesting findings of this piece of work was that a lot of poverty, the greatest contributor to poverty in Edinburgh, was the cost of housing, which is atypical for many places, but it was very clear that in Edinburgh we were seeing people who wouldn't be poor elsewhere because of housing costs. And since that work was done, you were formed in 2020, so that's 4 years ago, and the work that happened before that. Since that work was done, that pressure on housing has become ever greater. So the pressure, which is tipping more and more people into poverty. And I think it's the biggest challenge that we face in addressing this. And despite being handed the largest settlement outside the pandemic, the Scottish Government, in the 24-25 budget, the Scottish Government chose to reduce the affordable housing grant to the City Council. And we've had to say this week that we cannot agree to fund any more affordable houses, put any more in the programme, because there is no more budget to build them. And we will have to review what we can build for affordable housing as the year goes on. And this is all at a time when rents have risen faster in Scotland than anywhere in the UK. Today, we heard that they've risen 4 times faster than anywhere else in the UK. And I think that's a direct result because of the policies of the SNP and Green government on rent freezes, which has also seen £700 million of investment in new homes lost because institutional investors will not invest in Scotland. And at the same time, 22,000 rental properties have been removed from the rental market across Scotland. What do we offer to try and address some of this? Well, housing is obviously going to be a huge part of this. That's mainly devolved, so not...
Sorry, Joe, you're already over just 3 minutes. You need to wrap up. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. Just finish the sentence.
What I was going to say is that we offer to support the economy because we have to grow our way out to have the money to spend on the housing that we all need to deliver.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Thank you for your speech. Thank you very much. The next candidate to speak is Tommy Sheppard from the Scottish National Party, Edinburgh East and Musselburgh candidate. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. I have railed against poverty all of my life in various political guises, and I think it is a scourge on our society. I have seen how poverty limits people's potential, how it affects people's health and drives some into an early grave. And I've also seen how, in a societal sense, poverty deprives all of us from the benefits that we would get from many individuals being able to participate more fully in society and have a better life. And of course, poverty also is a contributor to poor health and the strain on our health service, to crime and to many other things. So we need to be focused. Any government should be focused on tackling poverty. But there are 2 distinct things here, it seems to me. One is to talk about the eradication of absolute poverty, and the other is to try and have immediate mitigation of the worst effects of it. And I would like to see absolute poverty eradicated. There will always be some variation in levels of household income and wealth, but I would certainly like to see absolute poverty eliminated. But I believe in order to do that, we need to fundamentally change society. We need to have an understanding that whilst enterprise is encouraged, people who run businesses have to operate within very strict rules and regulations which prevent their ability to exploit their workforce, their community, or the environment in which they are. We need to shift the amount of national income which goes into the public realm much greater in favour of that and away from private accumulation by wealthy individuals. And that will allow us to dramatically scale up investment in social housing, public infrastructure, and public services. Now, I don't think those types of policies are possible unless we have an independent Scotland with the capacity and the power to make those things happen in the way that other small countries have done, most noticeably Denmark. But I do think for as long as we are in the United Kingdom, there is stuff that we can do to try and mitigate the worst effects of this capitalist economy in which we live. And that's why we are pushing the new government, which I'm convinced will be a Labour government, to raise minimum wages to the level of the real living wage, to cut and eradicate the two-child limit, which caps welfare payments to the very poorest in our society, and to take other action, including bringing in social tariffs for utilities, which will help people make ends meet at the bottom of the scale. And I'm sad to say that the Labour Party, as yet, seems to be committed to continuing with the Tory policies of austerity, the forthcoming cuts in public spending, and keeping the cap on the income of the poor that the Tories put in place.
Tommy, that's your time as well. It says you finished now. Thank you so much. That's your 3 minutes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you. And we have the last but not least candidate, Mike Andersen from the Scottish Liberal Dem, and candidate from Edinburgh North and Leith. That's your 3 minutes starting now. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen, and good afternoon, everyone. As Carmen was saying, I'm Mike Andersen, the Liberal Democrat candidate for Edinburgh North and Leith. And I really want to say thank you to everyone that is joining us today, and also to the other panelists. I'm really excited for the exchange as we answer these questions. We are facing critical issues in our community. Across Scotland and here in Edinburgh, good, hardworking people are not getting the fair deal they were promised and that they deserve. People are struggling to get by, and more people are falling into poverty or struggling to make ends meet. I am committed to tackling poverty and strengthening our social security system. The Liberal Democrat Manifesto, which I'm very proud of, outlines bold steps to eradicate deep poverty within a decade. We will remove the two-child limit and benefit cap and ensure universal credit covers essentials like food and bills. No one should struggle to put food on their table or worry about how they're going to heat their home. We also recognize the invaluable contribution of carers. We will increase carers' allowance and expand eligibility to ensure carers receive the support they need and deserve. We will pressure the Scottish Government to match these commitments. Additionally, we will reform universal credit and safeguard the triple lock on pensions to protect the most vulnerable and ensure people can continue to live with dignity. These measures will create a robust framework to combat poverty, support carers, and ensure everyone has the social security they need to live with dignity. We can build a fairer society. There are political choices we can make, and we can be more compassionate, and we can give people the fair deal they deserve, but we have to make that choice. So I'm very happy to be here today, and thank everyone again who is attending. And for those that are not sure of my accent, I am originally South African, although I now live in Edinburgh, my chosen city. And yes, so thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you very much, Mike, for your speech. And now we have finished the first part of the event, and now we are going to go through the questions that is my belief is being shared with the candidates beforehand. So again, for this part of the event, every candidate will have 2 minutes. I will raise my electronic hand when you are 1 minute through your speech, just to give you a gentle reminder. And we will alter the turn in which candidates would answer the questions. So for the first questions, it would be Dan Heap, Joe Mowat, Tommy Sheppard, Mike Andersen, and then last but not least, Tracey, Gilbert, and so on for every question. So everybody has the chance to answer in the first turn. So for my colleague and friend, Linda, is going to read the first question. Linda, go ahead, please.
Hello, everybody. Now, the first question is on poverty in general. Some of you have sort of covered bits of this in your opening speeches. But the question to you is, every government says that it will make tackling poverty a key priority. What do you see as the key priorities to reduce the number of people living in poverty And how are you going to achieve this?
So the first then is for Dan Heap, please, for Greens. Thank you.
2 minutes, did you say? Yeah. Thank you very much. We do need to reinvest significantly in our social security system. Poverty is complex, it has different causes, but one of the tools that we know works, it's worked for over 100 years, is the social security system. If we pay into a social security system that helps people when they need it, we can reduce poverty. We have some extremely high levels of poverty in Scotland now. That's not always been the case. It has been lower, and there are actions government can take. We saw it actually, to be fair to Labour in the last Labour government, child poverty and actually pension poverty came down significantly. We're projected to see child poverty come down significantly in Scotland. And those falls in poverty are because those governments did or are using the powers of the social security system to reinvest in the benefit system. And the benefit system has been trashed by the UK government. They've introduced the child tax credit. They've frozen benefits for a number of years. That freeze has come off now, but not before it cut 6% of people's incomes. And it's been making the poorest people even poorer. Their incomes have fallen, I think, over 10%, where the richest have just got richer and richer. So we need to look again. I think it's probably medium terms and then some longer term actions. So the short term actions are some of those reversing some of those cuts, and some of those can be done relatively quickly, like the 2-child limit. You could cancel that and put the money back relatively easily. There's some longer term things like universal basic income, which would raise the threshold for standard of living and ensure everyone gets that. That is much more complicated than the long term job. But just to close, I would say that one of the things we do know works is the benefit system, is the social security system, which is not just for unemployed people. Almost everyone is a benefit claimant in one way or another. And if we reinvest that, we can tackle poverty.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you for keeping time. Next candidate to respond to the question would be Joe Mowat from the Conservative Party, please.
Thank you, Carmen. I suppose to take a global view and the broad view of this, if you want to reduce poverty, if you want to get rid of poverty, which I think, as you say, everyone says we want to do it, the most effective way of getting rid of poverty is actually a capitalist system. If you look globally, it's lifted more people out of poverty from $1 a day living up to sort of $25 a day living than any other method in the world. So I would refute these claims that it's just so that socialism is the answer. I think capitalism has clearly been the winner in this one. How you apply that, I wouldn't start with the social security system. The social security system is important. That should be the safety net. If you want fewer people to be poor, you need a healthy economy. You need good jobs. You need good jobs that pay well. And I'm afraid it was the last time Labour in government, they enshrined low pay through working tax credits, which allowed workers to be paid less and the government to pick up the tab. What we want is actually the employers to pick up the tab so that government has to pick up less of the tab so we can invest in those who truly need it. So it's about good work. It's about a strong economy and growing that economy and ensuring that our education system is properly invested in so that people can aspire to leave poverty and that there are routes out of them.
Thank you very much, Joe. Again, in time, thank you so much. Next, it would be Tommy Sheppard. It's your turn now, Tommy.
Right, here I am, yes. So again, I say again, there is a difference between taking immediate action to try and mitigate the consequences of some of the extreme poverty we face in our society and longer term structural changes to how we organize our economy to try and make sure that there is a much smaller gap between those with the most and those with the least. But to concentrate on the immediate term, since there's an election on the 4th of July, I do think that the UK government could learn from some of the actions that the Scottish Government has taken in this field. The Scottish Child Payment, which puts cash into the pockets of low-income households directly and is currently £26.30 per week per child. That has been signalled by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation as a game changer. It has lifted 90,000 children out of absolute poverty. Now, that is not to say that it is that things are okay. They are far from okay, but it is a start. And the UK government could consider doing that UK-wide. The Scottish Government has also mitigated through the Scottish housing payment, the bedroom tax, and is trying to do what it can to mitigate the 2-child limit on universal credit. Again, these limits, these caps on the social security support to the poorest should be removed, and particularly ought to be removed by an incoming Labour government. And the other thing I think we can do with poverty is that, you know, if some people are going to be less poor, then other people have to be less rich. And we need a system of reward and taxation in this country, which makes and obliges those who can most afford it to pay more. And if you even just look at the recent cuts in national insurance that the Conservatives have brought in, somebody earning £80,000 a year will get twice the tax rebate, twice the benefit than somebody earning
you have to wrap up.
that. That is just making the situation even worse. We need progressive taxation which taxes the rich and tries to support the poor.
Thank you, Tommy. And next, the same question for the Tracey Gilbert Labour candidate. Thank you.
Thank you. So what are Labour going to deliver if we are lucky enough to be elected? One of our commitments, which I think the SNP are not supporting and the Tories are not supporting, and actually would be so transformational to 200,000 workers in Scotland alone, is the New Deal for Working People, which will deliver a real living wage for people going forward. We will end hire and rehire and stop the exploitative use of 0-hour contracts. That's a commitment that's paid for already in the first 100 days of a Labour government. Beyond that, we've also committed to reforming universal benefit, which holds so many families in poverty. And on a recent call I had with the Tracey Trust and with Joseph Rowntree Foundation, whilst poverty limits and poverty increases across Scotland under the SNP in Scotland and in Westminster with the Tory government, they know that actually housing, as well as reforming the welfare state, as well as the New Deal for Workers, are all positive ways of lifting families out of poverty. We need to end the fact that it's normalised that poor people are feeding poor people in food banks. That is appalling. Labour also committed to having a windfall tax on the gas and oil and energy companies to pay for GB Energy, which will cut energy bills once and for all for working people. Again, I don't know what the SNP's position is. I think they're opposing a windfall tax, but they are taxing anyone earning £29,000 and more higher than anywhere else in the UK. So people who are qualifying as teachers, nurses and doctors pay more in tax, and they are not the wealthiest, rather than actually taxing the oil and gas giants.
Thank you. And again, right in time. Thank you so much, Tracey. I apologize, Mike. It should have been your turn. I'm sorry. Before Tracey, but now you have your 2 minutes now. My apologies. There we go.
No problem at all, Carmen. So I think there's just, to start with, we all know the argument on trickle-down economics, but I really have to say, in practice, do we really think that it is working? No one chooses to be in poverty, and it is not a simple case of just saying people should just work harder to get out of poverty. That is not the solution. So we have seen that people are under further and further pressure on their households due to the cost of living crisis, and people are living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of people's finances are one paycheck away or one emergency away from entering poverty. So we need to be there with a proper safety net to support people when they get into difficulty so that we can stop the cycle of poverty at the start. And that's why we would strengthen universal credit. We would move the initial payment for universal credit from 5 weeks to 5 days, so that people don't start out in bad, expensive credit, but can get into the system as fast as possible. We'd also eliminate the punitive sanctions and put in supportive measures to get people back into work. We'd also set up an independent commission to work on a yearly basis to assess universal credit to make sure that it meets the needs of daily essentials like food and bills. And we'll also put in mechanisms to get people back into work, with job creation focused on green jobs and renewables, and a greater focus on training, reskilling, and education to make sure people are equipped for the modern economy. And finally, we'd also increase mental health support, because we know that people living in poverty living in poverty is not an easy situation to be in, and those people need our support, and they need mental health help that is available to them when they need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you so much. And we are going to go next to the next question. So, Linda, if you can come in. Next question for the candidates. Thank you.
Okay, question number 2. This is with regards to housing. Now, with several councils, including Edinburgh, announcing a housing emergency, the UK as a whole is experiencing a severe housing crisis at the moment. For many, affordable housing just isn't so affordable. And if someone is fortunate enough to gain social or accessible housing, the properties are often unsuitable. So what plans do you and your party have to tackle this critical housing issue?
Thank you, Linda. And we are going to start a round of responses with Joe Mowat from the Conservative Party.
Sorry, different screen popped up. Thank you,
Carmen. Housing. I talked a bit about housing in my introduction. I think it's absolutely critical that we build more housing. The only way we are going to supply more affordable housing in the sense of either social housing or mid-market rent is if we build more housing. And we're at a state in Edinburgh, certainly, that we need to build at all tenures. We need to build more market housing. We need to build more affordable. We need to build more mid-market rent, and we need to build more affordable. The simplest thing to unlock that housing is to get rid of some of the Green and SNP's changes to rent caps, which has taken investment out of Scotland. The day that the rent cap went on, there were businesses coming in and saying, that's it, we're going to Manchester to invest. So we have to look at housing in the whole. We have to stop making Scotland less competitive. We have to pull in the pension funds. We have to increase public funding for market social housing, and we have to ensure the codes say that it should be suitable now. So if we were building, we would be building suitable housing, but we're not building enough of it.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you for your response. And now it would be Tommy Sheppard from SNP.
Oh, sorry. Hi there. Well, I think there are immediate things that we can do to try and ameliorate the situation, which is, as we all know, extremely problematic in Edinburgh, where house prices are high, where rents are high, and the demand for housing is extreme, more than any other part of Scotland. I very much welcome the fact that the City Council and the Scottish Government have taken action to curb the use of property as short-term lets for tourist accommodation, rather than that being provided as long-term rented accommodation for families who need it. And that will, in time, have the effect of putting back in to the housing stock and make available for rent many thousands of properties which were taken out of it in order to make a quick buck by landlords whose only concern was to make money out of the property rather than to provide shelter from it. I think also rent controls will help, but the biggest single thing we need to do is to build more social housing for rent. And that can only be done if the money is available. And the Conservative government keeps on cutting the capital budgets that are available to the Scottish government, which is precisely why the Scottish government can't provide councils like Edinburgh with the guarantees and the financial backing that they need to do house building on the scale that we need. That needs to stop. The 16% cut in the Scottish capital block grant this year should be reversed by an incoming Labour government, and they should seek to try and build up the reserves that are available for house building. My fear is that because Labour say they are going to stick to the Tory spending plans, that simply is not going to happen. And to do that on the scale we need, that's why in Scotland, we should have the powers to make these things happen through becoming a normal, independent country.
Thank you, Tommy. That's 2 minutes. Thank you so much for the response. And then next, it would be Mike Andersen, Leith Dem candidate, please.
Thank you, Carmen. I was recently reading an article about housing around the world and the expense of housing and how different cities are facing housing crisis. And there was a case study there between Hong Kong and Singapore. In Hong Kong, only 50% of people can afford to own a home, whereas in Singapore, up to 75% can. So what was the difference between the two? The difference was that Singapore continued to build housing. And that I agree with a lot of the other people on this panel. It's one of the key things that we need to be doing. Homelessness is at record levels. 10,000 children are in temporary accommodation, and people cannot afford houses to rent or buy. So we would be implementing a national housing plan to meet the housing emergency and get more houses built. We would build new houses in conjunction with and in partnership with the Scottish Government so that we would aim to build 380,000 homes a year across the UK, 150,000 of which would be social homes. We'd also reintroduce social renting as a long-term option and also get the houses that are no longer fit for purpose back into usable state so that they can actually be accessed by people, because there are a lot in Edinburgh. There's a large stock of houses that just simply are sitting there because they are not in a good enough condition, and that would be an easy fix to get those up to standard and get people in them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for your response. And we are going now for Tracey Gilbert from Labour Party, please.
Thank you, Carmen. So Labour will commit to building more social housing. It's the only commitment we can do. We will get Britain building again. We must build more social housing if we're going to give people adequate accommodation. It has to be green accommodation that is built and fit for purpose, so it also keeps energy bills low, and it's houses that are fit for the future that aren't riddled with damp. It's appalling that the SNP in Scotland cut the social housing budgets and stopped houses being built. And I think to pretend that isn't at their responsibility is terrible. Wow. Shelter have said that it's appalling as well. There is 2,000 children, just under 2,000 children.
Sorry, Tracey, I have to stop your timing. Please, don't interrupt when all the candidates talking. We are going to leave people to use the time without interruption or interjections, please. Just leave people do the 2 minutes without interruptions. Go on. I will put the clock on time now again. Go on.
No problem. So there's 2,000 children, just under 2,000 children who are living in homeless accommodation. That is just an appalling state of affairs. And poverty is rising under the SNP, as much as they don't want to admit that that's the case. I just want to also clarify, Labour Party are quite clear about ending. There will be no austerity under a Labour government. It's in the Scottish Manifesto and in the National Manifesto. And we are committed to delivering good quality, affordable housing for our citizens. I grew up in a council house, as I said, and it is a core part of Labour's values and something we should be very, very proud of.
Thank you, Tracey. And just before, please, candidates, we have to use the 2 minutes. We have been interrupted. I would appreciate if everybody stick to that rule, please. Okay, so next candidate for housing, Dan Heap for the Greens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Housing obviously is a devolved issue, and a lot of the tools are within the powers of the Scottish Government rather than the UK Government and Parliament that's been elected. But one of the big decisions that the UK Parliament and Government do make that has a major impact on our ability to build housing is budgets. We have not been given the money that we need to invest in housing, invest in more social and affordable housing, which of course is the major way we can tackle the housing emergency. And that's why I will, the risk of being perhaps a little bit repetitive, we'll go back to the point I made at the start, is that there are huge reserves of wealth that are untaxed. And we're the only party that is willing to ask those big questions, look at things like wealth taxes, look at things like taking away those colossal oil and gas subsidies to free up funding to build these houses, not just build the new ones, but also retrofit existing ones to bring around energy bills. I will just say briefly as well, this is actually it is part of the devolved settlement, but I do think we also need to look at planning democracy as well, and look at giving local people a greater say in what is built. Because we have had in my ward that I represent in Parliament, in the council, there's been objections to student housing and other non-social housing developments that have actually been supported by I think it was all councillors that rejected that because they weren't providing homes for local people, and then the Scottish Government's reporter overturned that. So I also think we need to give communities a third-party right to appeal, so we can get more democracy in the planning system, because there's a great will for more social housing, and we just need to make sure that is expressed and can be delivered on through local democratic processes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan, just in time. I realize that we have like 15 minutes really left. So Linda, I would leave to your wisdom to choose the next two questions, because I think that's as much as we are going to be able to cover. So if you want to go for the next question, and I think we are going to cover another two.
Thanks, Carmen. It's difficult because every question is important. But one that I think affects a lot of people, and a lot of hidden people, is social care. So I'd like to ask, with so many councils struggling, some on the verge of bankruptcy and others announcing it in England, and the population's living longer, how would you increase funding so that social care is afforded the priority it needs to have?
Important question indeed. Thank you very much, Linda. And the first candidate to answer this round of questions would be Tommy Sheppard from SNP. Thank you.
Thanks, Carmen. I think it was Wes Streeting, the Labour Health Secretary, who said that all roads lead back to Westminster. And in a sense, that is true, because at the end of the day, we can debate the performance of the Scottish Government, but I think every commentator would agree that its job is made a lot more difficult by the fact that it is not in control of its own budget, and the amount of money it has to spend is determined by Westminster, and that sum has been cut in most of the last 14 years in real terms. So if that is true, then the most important thing we need to get out of the change of government on the 4th of July is a change in spending priorities. And that means that the £18 billion worth of cuts in public services, a good half of which will probably fall on the health service, need to be stopped. And we need to have a new government in Westminster that doesn't just say it's going to accept the plans of the old one, but that it is going to review and change those plans in order to stop the cuts in public spending. So that's the first thing. Stop the 18 billion austerity cuts that are in the plans of the Tories and are also promised by Labour. But the second thing is we need to do more than that. We need an actual increase in funding for NHS spending for health and social care. And we, the SNP in our manifesto, we called for a 16 billion UK increase in the next year in order to fund a rapid action to tackle waiting lists and to ease the stress on these already overstretched services. That would provide 1.6 billion for the Scottish NHS, and a large chunk of that would allow us to try and move forward with the development of a national care service and improve social care provision. Because, and again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but in Scotland at least, we have a substantial amount of free personal social care, which is not available to people in England, and that needs to be protected. Okay, one final thing I wanted to say is that the other thing that we need to do and we need to fund is to understand the relationship between the social care provision and the other strains on the NHS. And I would cite as a positive thing the experience in Lothian in Edinburgh, where the hospital at home service allows people to be treated in their own home where they can be, who would otherwise have to go into a care setting or an NHS bed. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Next candidate to answer the question would be Mike Andersen from Leith. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. So we all are aware that care is in crisis. There are thousands of people on wait lists for care, and people are stranded in hospital beds because they cannot be released into care, which puts further strain on the NHS. We believe that everyone deserves quality care that allows them to live independently with dignity and in their own home and receive care in their own homes where possible. So we also believe that carers deserve more support as they are often forgotten. So we would fix this by empowering care users and support care workers, whether paid or unpaid, and invest to save, recognizing that by putting people into proper care, we can save on more expensive procedures and hospital beds in the NHS. We would also put in a higher carers minimum wage and support unpaid carers by including things like unpaid leave. And we'd work with the Scottish Government to provide the funding to the Scottish Government so that they can also implement these changes in Scotland to increase carer support payments in Scotland. We would, however, oppose the Scottish Government's centralisation process of, as Tony mentioned, the National Care Service. The National Care Service has been delayed and delayed. People cannot wait, and we cannot go through the expense of the billions that it's going to cost. We need to give people services now, and we would divert that money to work with frontline workers, employ staff, and increase carer standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for your response. Next one responding this question would be Tracey Gilbert from Labour. Thank you.
Thank you. Hand in hand with social care is obviously the NHS, and as I think Mike just pointed out, that without reforming and investing in the NHS, we're not going to be able to resolve the problems that we have within social care, partly due to bed blocking. I have people who want to get home but can't be assessed for care packages because the NHS, as a devolved power, is not being funded properly and money is not being spent. We're spending more in the NHS but getting much less for it. So we, as well as dealing with the care crisis, we also have to deal with the NHS crisis, and we want to make sure that we invest in the NHS by introducing 160,000 new hospital appointments to cut those waiting list times, and by addressing them, that'll take some of the pressure off the social care. Not all of it, but it'll make a good start in terms of addressing the problem. So many people are unpaid carers, And that is just not fair. And we need to look at how we support carers better and support the families, from children right through to adults, who are providing a service for free, supporting people. And we need to address this wholly. Sadly, the Scottish care strategy that's been brought in with the Scottish Government has been rejected by all the trade unions. And we still have much more to do to make it a public service, not a private one that the SNP are trying to deliver in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracey, for your response. And next it would be Dan Heap from the Green candidate, please.
Thank you. Now, I feel like I'm going to become a broken record talking about funding, but funding is really one of the two major issues that we have in social care. We need a big reinvestment in social care to provide really high quality care, good care facilities, good training for care workers, and it is a big financial commitment. But as I said before, the money is there. The richest tiny top percentage of the country have got richer and richer and richer. The poor have got poorer, and it's time we start accessing some of that wealth to pay for a big reinvestment in public services, including in social care. And again, what we're asking is, in the context of these people's wealth, actually quite small amounts of money, but it would raise, as I said, 70 billion across the UK, which would provide for a big cash injection in care. What I would say as well is it's not just about financing care adequately, which we're not doing, but also helping people become care workers and to work in the care sector. And even if you have the money for that, that we do have an issue about Brexit, for example, and changes to migration. Make it every care provider will tell you it's become much harder since the Brexit transition period ended to hire the appropriate workers. Again, that is not in Scotland's. It's not in the power of the Scottish Government to do that. That's something we need to do through the UK government. Similarly, with wages, if we had a proper statutory living wage rather than the pretendy one that we have, then people perhaps would be more encouraged to go into the care sector. I've got a lot more to say, but I've got 3 seconds left, so I'll leave it there and end on time.
Thank you for self-policing yourself there with the timing. Thank you so much. And now is the turn for Joe Mowat, Conservative Party. Thank you.
Thanks, Carmen. It's always difficult coming in
At the end, because the problem's been set out before you. There's an intimate relationship between the NHS and the social care sector, and it's of an area which is so very devolved that it is very difficult in talking about it in a Westminster election when you're for a Scottish constituency. Because actually the solutions that the Conservatives are setting out and are looking at in England about in England and Wales about increasing the investing in the long-term workforce plan that they have proposed, and setting up implementing their white paper review to attract and maintain and give a social care service, and increase and give multi-year funding to local authorities to provide a stability of care for them, are not things that apply in Scotland, because that is all devolved. And in what we see in Scotland is we have this proposal to spend £2 billion on reforming how we deliver social care, when actually we should be spending that £2 billion saying, how do we make care a really attractive, secure career for people who wish to be carers, but then they see that career progression, so they don't start as a carer and then get stuck, but there's ways through to other jobs, which is something the Scottish Conservatives have discussed at policy forums. So for me, it's about the stability and investment in the workforce, as well as having sufficient funding to deliver that, along with reforms in the NHS to free up hospital beds for those that need it. But also we should be looking at providing, and we have been really bad at NHS reform in Scotland, we need to be reforming where you can access healthcare. Does everything need to be through a GP surgery? Does everything need to be through hospital? Because there are lots of other places that are easier, more convenient to get to for some of the minor complaints that free up those appointments for those people at GPs and hospitals that really need them. And that has to be part of the system. And I'll stop there. Yeah. Sorry, Carmen.
Thank you, Chair. I will try to squeeze the last question. Again, candidates have 2 minutes, but if you can do it shorter than that, it's okay as well. We'll try to squeeze the last question, and we are going to maybe go over to time a little bit, but I hope everybody's okay with that. Linda?
Thanks, Carmen. I'm going to try and sort of squeeze 2 questions into one here. So I'm setting you as a challenge, okay? The main gist of this is talking about those with disabilities, because those people are some of the most vulnerable in our society, but they're often the most demonised and vilified. Most of the people with disabilities have extra costs or pay poverty premiums, I think they call them, for energy, credit, insurance, etc. And if they are able to get work, they tend to be in low-paid jobs. So what would your party do to ensure that services and support are protected and hopefully increased for those with disabilities, and that their needs are embedded in all policies and legislation? Last question, it's a corker.
That's a really, really good question there for our candidates. Thank you so much, Linda. So the first one taking the response would be Mike Andersen for Leith. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was hoping that this would be the question that comes up, because I do think this is an area that is very much overlooked, and people with disabilities are often, are put aside, ignored, or vilified. We need to change our approach to that. We need a human rights focused approach. We need to recognize not only people's human dignity, but we also need to recognize the massive value of disabled people in our society. So we would embed disability needs in all our policies. We'd ensure timely access to healthcare, support for mental health, recognizing that higher incidence of mental health issues in people with disabilities. We'd also provide further economic opportunities and employment, with incentives for to hire, support, and implement flexi working conditions in office places. We'd also increase training support and education for people with disabilities to gain skills that they need or to reskill as is required. We'd also promote community-based services. We want people to be able to live independently in their homes while also participate in the communities that they live. And finally, we'd also introduce further and stronger anti-discrimination measures to ensure that people with disabilities are treated with the dignity that is inherent to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your response. And we will go now to Tracey Gilbert from Labour candidate. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's many things that we need to do. Obviously, the New Deal for Working People will help people. But beyond that, when people with disabilities are in the workplace, we need to do more to support them once they've taken a job, to make sure if they are doing that transition from benefits into the workplace, that if that work placement doesn't work out, there is no penalty there. So that's something that we're very committed to. We also need to make workplaces accessible, and as a trade unionist every day, I'm always working to try and make workplaces more accessible so that supports are in place, and also mentoring when people are in jobs to get that additional support as necessary. On a practical level, GB Energy would help obviously bring down the costs of bills for people to make it more affordable, because so many people, particularly disabled people and families with children who are in families with disabled adults, suffer because of food poverty and fuel poverty, and because they'll have higher energy bills, sometimes for keeping equipment charged and sometimes for other reasons. So that'd be something else that we would want to do. We've also tied into our manifesto that the Low Pay Commission will also look at including the cost of living crisis going forward. So that would tie in any cost of living crisis to make sure that low pay, any factors that were implemented in low pay were included within that pay rise. So that would also help working families. But also there must be a safety net for welfare to make sure that people are not left behind and that the welfare state captures the people who are the most vulnerable in society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracey, as well for keeping on time. Thank you so much. And next responding would be Dan Heap for the Green candidate.
Thank you. I'm just getting the clock there ready so I can take these like 2 minutes. So I will go back to some of the points I raised earlier about reinvestment in the social security system. We have seen a fundamental dismantling of the benefit system since 2010, and disabled people have been hardest hit by that much more than any group. We've had cuts to Employment Support Alliance, we've had cuts, we've had the new, or not now new, because it's taken so long to come in, but the PIP system has been absolutely disastrous for disabled people. So those, where those are reserved, and they're affecting people in Scotland directly, those reforms seem to stop. And it's very disappointing to see the Conservative Party standing on a manifesto promising even more harm to disabled people through reforming PIP, having spent already the past 14 years doing it. They're offering us another 5 years of tax on disabled people. What I would say specifically with personal dependence payment benefits is obviously now devolved to the Scottish Parliament, and there has been some really significant improvements. It's projected by the Scottish Fiscal Commission to pay about £600 million more out to people who are receiving that benefits. I'm one of them, and I had a personally pretty good experience of that process, and I was very proud. It was actually a Green MSP, or then Green MSP, Alison Johnston, who put in legal protections for people within the new Scottish Disability Benefit System not to go through unnecessary assessments, and that's leading to more people getting the benefits and more people getting it at the higher rate as well. I would say as well, just in the time I've got left, we also want to tackle discrimination. And one of the things we're suggesting is giving people more time to bring discrimination cases, because it has a very tight time limit. But if people think they are being discriminated on the grounds of disability or anything else, then they would have extra time under that policy to make a claim against that discrimination.
Thank you very much, Dan, for your response. And then we are going to Joe Mowat for the Conservative Party. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the practical methods that will be delivered is looking at the winter improving the winter payment, heating payment for all disabled people to tackle cold homes in winter, because we appreciate that the energy bills for disabled people in the winter, people are making sort of inequitable choices about whether they've got to heat their home or use their disability aids and their equipment for doing that. So that's a commitment to change that. And also to look at how disability benefits are better targeted to support people, and splitting that out between physical disabilities and mental health disabilities by improving the amount of mental health support and expanding that, because they need to be treated quite differently from the point of view of how people can be accessed. And again, we want to support people and disabled people into work, because we appreciate there are a lot of disabled people who want to work but struggle to find work and access that work at the moment. And that's important both for the contribution that they can make and for the benefits of working that can be delivered.
Thank you so much, Joe. And the last candidate to speak in this answer the question would be Tommy Sheppard from the SNP candidate. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. I've been the Member of Parliament for Edinburgh East for the last 9 years until the dissolution of Parliament, and we do many hundreds of cases every month trying to help individuals with problems. And right at the top of that list are people who have problems with the Department of Work and Pensions, and many of them have disabilities. So I've seen firsthand how the existing system discriminates against disabled people, and I believe there are stuff that we can do very quickly to make things better. one thing I'd urge the incoming government to do is to scrap the bedroom tax, for example, because in many households who live where there's a couple and one is disabled, they require quite often the extra room for care or for equipment. And yet, if they live in a two-bedroomed house and they are a couple, they will get penalised through the bedroom tax, and that could be scrapped immediately. The whole business of work capability assessment that the DWP undertakes needs fundamentally reviewed, because I believe it's extremely unfair, particularly in the field of mental health and people who suffer disabilities to their mental health. There is no understanding, it seems, that the very process of doing the assessment and monitoring is in itself, or can be in itself, a contributory factor to poor and deteriorating mental health. And yet they persist in doing it. And actually, the process itself is making people sick and making people vulnerable. And there is no understanding that it is in the nature of some illnesses and some disabilities that some days are better than others. You have good periods and you have bad periods, and yet there's no understanding in the system to do that. But I think the biggest single contribution we could make, and this is central to the SNP manifesto, is to bring in a social tariff for utility bills, for gas, electricity, and for broadband, so that people who are in low-income households or who have special needs pay a social tariff which would be set at 50% of the standard tariff and paid for by the big utility companies themselves. And every registered disabled person would be eligible for that, and it would make a big contribution to their life.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. And thus, thank you all candidates for coming here and answer our questions. We have come to the end of the event today. I do realize that it's really difficult to answer these complicated questions in such a short time, so I appreciate your effort. At Poverty in Edinburgh, we wanted to make poverty an issue for the election, and we would like to politicians and candidates to think about poverty and to work with us and to really have poverty in mind to be eradicated forever. We are a really wealthy country, and we can do much better than we are doing now. That's our belief. And we do appreciate all of your candidates to be here with us to discuss poverty. I would like also to say thank you to all the people that are watching these Hustings today, and also to the Poverty Alliance, that they have provided with the technical support and ongoing support to the daily running of Edinburgh and Poverty in Edinburgh. Thank you very much to the Poverty Alliance, and good luck for all the candidates for the elections, and remember that this is all being recorded. So we have all in record, and just thank you so much for coming here and staying with us today. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.